everyone. Welcome to the lecture for today. This is my first time recording, so I'm a little nervous. It's all good. Reminders for a couple of things. Due Tuesday, you should have already done this. Your summary paper revision plan should have been turned in on Eli Review already. If you haven't already done so, please email me. There's a couple of Google forms you'll have to fill out. The one that you should have already done is just regarding whether or not you have sufficient resources to be able to continue this course online. So please fill that out, and if you don't have sufficient resources, let me know so that I can adjust your assignments accordingly. You should have already finished reading the Introduction to Democracy and Demagoguery. If you haven't done that, I would recommend reading it before watching the lecture. And then due Saturday at 11:45 p.m., your summary paper draft number 2 should be due on Eli Review. You should watch this before the end of Saturday. You could watch it early, that's fine too. And then to prove that you finished doing everything you need to do for this week, you should complete the quiz, the Google form quiz. It's really, really low key. I'm not going to test you on any information. It's just whether or not you completed the things that I asked you to do. It's just a yes, no, honor code based questions. So it should be super easy. So get those done. Okay, so first we're going to talk a little bit about the chapter, the introductory chapter that I had you guys read, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about MLA formatting because I noticed that a lot of you guys had some trouble doing that in your summary essay. So we're going to talk about that. This shouldn't be very long, shouldn't be more than, I'm thinking like 15-20 minutes, and you're good to go. Okay, so the chapter that we read doesn't talk about demagoguery super clearly because she's going to spend an entire chapter defining what she means by demagoguery, and it's the first chapter, it's the one you're reading next time. But really briefly, demagoguery as a noun, it refers to a political leader who seeks support by appealing to the desires and prejudices of ordinary people rather than by using rational argument. As a verb, it's rhetorically exploiting an issue for political purposes in a way calculated to appeal to the desires and prejudices of ordinary people. So we're going to talk about how this relates to rhetoric and how it relates to the rhetorical triangle and also to the fallacies that we talked about a couple weeks ago. Okay, so if you guys remember, we talked about the very basic rhetorical triangle. We have ethos, we have logos, and we have pathos. So logos talks about the logic of a message. It doesn't make sense. This is why we're doing certain things, right? Ethos is talking about the credibility of a speaker, and pathos is using the emotion to motivate people to do certain things. So when you are trying to convince someone to do something, ideally you're going to use all three. But you're going to find that a lot of times that certain speakers are going to rely heavily on one or another. And in demagoguery, a lot of times they're going to rely very heavily on emotion, and sometimes in a way that's more manipulative than anything else. So being aware of this as a college student or as an ordinary person is going to be very important. So let's talk about a couple of famous leaders that were known as demagogues. And of course I pull up all the big baddies, right? So we've got Hitler, we've got Chairman Mao, and we've got the Jonestown, the leader of that cult that made everyone drink Kool-Aid and commit suicide. So these are all people who were very charismatic and were able to appeal to the emotions of the common people and get them to do certain things that later on you're like, hang on a second, how did we abandon our logic and the things that made sense to us to do all these ridiculous things? So I wanted to share with you guys a little bit about from this book that I read, I think 2 years ago. It was really good. I'd highly recommend it. It's called Wild Swans, and it's written by this lady named Zheng Chang. And she grew up in communist China. She currently lives in the United States, but her book talks a lot about the demagoguery that took place during this time. And it's just insane how twisted and how bizarre the leaders work. But when you look at it, you see how they were able to use emotion and appeals to get people to do things that they wouldn't normally do. So this is a quote from a part of the book. Meanwhile, Madame Mao and her cohorts were renewing their efforts to prevent the country from working. In industry, their slogan was, "To stop production is revolution itself." In agriculture, in which they now began to meddle seriously, "We would rather have socialist weeds than capitalist crops." Acquiring foreign technology became sniffing other foreigners' farts and calling them sweet. In education, "We want illiterate working people, not educated spiritual aristocrats." They called for school children to rebel against their teachers again. In January 1974, classroom windows, tables, and chairs in schools in Beijing were smashed. In 1966, Madame Mao claimed this was like the revolutionary action of English workers destroying machines in the 18th century. So it's a very bizarre twist of logic in a way that they're appealing to the emotions and trying to connect with people in a very strange way. So in the introduction that you guys read, they talked, the author talked a little bit about how demagoguery works, very, very briefly. And one of the things they do, demagogues do, is they create this kind of us versus them mentality. So you see this in Wild Swans. Madame Mao, she has this very, the in crowd is the Chinese people, the out crowd is the Westerners, the foreigners, and anyone who is outside is other. They're the bad guys and they're against us. So that includes not just Westerners, but aristocrats and rich people. So very creating this binary to be able to create a lot of tension between people so that you stop listening to logic and you start thinking, oh, they're the enemy, therefore anything they do must be wrong. So I was thinking about some different ways that demagogues have divided people modern day. So a couple of common us versus them categories that I came up with were religious versus non-religious groups, or even specific religions against each other, like Christians versus Muslims, or other religions like that. Another is Democrats versus Republicans. So if I affiliate a certain way, then anyone that doesn't affiliate with the same party must be absolutely ridiculous. And I know people, like my in-laws, for example, who are convinced that Democrats are of the devil, and it's pretty amusing. Boomers versus Gen Z. So think about demagoguery is not something of the past. It is not something that has happened in some ridiculous government. It's not history we're studying. This is something that happens on a daily basis, happens today. And so being aware of it is extremely important. So if you turn to pages 3 and 4 in your textbook, they mention the story of Harriet Martineau and how people attacked her and her arguments. And as I was reading through it, I thought there were a couple of logical fallacies that sound oddly familiar. So we went over logical fallacies a couple weeks ago. A couple weeks ago, and we talked about a couple of them. The first one that really came up was ad hominem abusive. So that's the one where you attack the character of a person rather than addressing the argument they're making, right? So the author, Patricia Roberts Miller, says that in demagoguery, it's very common that rather than talking about the arguments that people are making, we're suddenly making judgments based on the character of the people or the supposed character of the people. And I find myself doing this very often. I will judge, for example, a certain presidential candidate and say, well, whatever argument they make must be illogical because I think this candidate is a bad person. And it doesn't matter whatever comes out of their mouth, I'll just assume it's illogical and evil and bad. And that is not a logical way to approach anything. So I'm working on that, guys. Another is identities and binaries. So again, that back to that us and them thing. Instead of recognizing that, you know, there are people who are in between and that it isn't all like either you're righteous or you're evil, they kind of create a false dichotomy, and that's another logical fallacy where it's either or. It's either this or this, and you don't consider that there may be other options, right? So again, maybe another possible logical fallacy that is being used. And you'll find that in demagoguery, a lot of times logical fallacies are going to be employed to manipulate people to do certain things. Okay, so that was my very brief lecture on the introduction to demagoguery and democracy. This book is going to be super fun to talk about. It's going to affect the way you do your argument paper. So if you have any questions about it, even if you just want to chat about it, send me an email. I'd love to talk more about it. We're getting to the kind of boring part of the lecture here, MLA formatting. So yes, it is insanely boring. So I just spent 2 hours changing. So I had a paper that I'm submitting for publication, and it's like 15, 20 pages, and I had prepared it all MLA format, was ready to submit it, and then I found out I had formatted it wrong, so I had to change it to Chicago formatting, and goodness, it was boring. I was wondering if life has meaning after all, right? So the thing is, the academic community that you guys are all going to be involved in, and it's going to be different academic communities, maybe a biology community or a computer programming community. No matter what community you're affiliated with, your how you present yourself and how they're going to judge your work is going to be affected by your ability to adhere to specified formats. So it is important to learn the different requirements for formatting. For this class, I am requiring your papers to all be formatted in MLA. So far, I've been very, very lax about it. I haven't been super strict. The summary paper, I am going to be docking points if you have something that isn't specifically MLA formatted. So pay attention to this. Make your revisions for your paper. So basically, it sucks to be you. You're going to have to listen to me and format your paper according to MLA formatting, but you have to learn it sooner or later. Different classes are going to ask you to do different formatting styles. So the links that I provide to you are going to be useful because they tell you how to do formatting styles outside of MLA. So when you go on to whatever your major is, you're going to have access to resources that will help you learn a new formatting style for wherever you go. Okay, so I did not make this PowerPoint presentation, so if it's really, really ugly, it's not my fault. If it's awesome, it's definitely on me. Yeah, if it's awesome, it's definitely me. Okay, so a couple things to remember. MLA style paper should be typed on white 8.5 by 11 paper. So that's your standard paper. Double space everything. Use 12 point Times New Roman or similar font. And I'm just gonna say, just do Times New Roman. That's what people are used to. Leave only one space after punctuation. Set all margins to 1 inch on all sides. Indent the first line of paragraphs 1/2 inch. So usually you indent by hitting the tab key on your keyboard. Okay, an MLA style paper should have a header with page numbers located in the upper right-hand corner. It should use italics for the titles of container works, and you should place endnotes on a separate page before the list of works cited. So if this is becoming overwhelming to you, don't worry. I have a Word document where we're going to format it together really briefly so that you'll know what Microsoft Word buttons you have to push or whatever. But basically you should, on the top of your paper, should have a header. So you're on the right-hand side of your paper, it should have the page numbers. If you mention a book, so for your example, your summary paper, you're going to have to be referencing Judith Jarvis Thompson's A Defense of Abortion. So you should, if you're referring to a book, then you should be italicizing the title of the book. And then if you're referencing, for example, an article inside of a book, it should be in quotation marks. So remember to separate those two and do the right ones. And then you're going to have a works cited page at the end. So anytime you reference a work that is not your own, you should be saying, hey, if you are interested in looking more into it, these are the places you go to find this information. So you will be required to make a works cited list. Okay, because you are summarizing 3 different papers, I do want you guys to have headings. So you'll have a title of your paper, so just like your summary paper, but every time you get to a different summary for a different paper, I want you guys to have a heading. And it looks like headings should usually be numbered. In my opinion, like for this paper, you don't have to number it. It just, as long as it's consistent, I'm okay with it. Okay, in text example, if you are referencing a specific quote, you have to have in-text citations to show that this is not your work, this is not your writing. And if you fail to do this, that is a form of plagiarism. So if you notice the circled aspects in this in-text example, she has it in parentheses, and then she references which page it's on. So if you are quoting, if you're directly quoting Thompson for your summary in part of it, you have to do this. You shouldn't be doing this because in all reality, I don't like it in such a short summary for you to be pulling direct quotes, but if you do need to have an in-text citation. Okay. So let's say that, so in this example, Wordsworth stated that romantic poetry was marked by a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. So we already mentioned that Wordsworth is saying this. So in this example, you don't have to say the author's name again in the parentheses. You just put the page number, as you see there. But if you don't mention the author's name, then you have to put the author's last name in the parentheses in addition to the page number. Okay, so for MLA formatting, all of your citations go at the very, very, very end of your essay on a separate page. So what you're going to want to provide for each citation is you want the author, the title of the source, title of the container, the version, number, publisher, publication date, and location. Whew, that's a lot of things. So we'll go over that together. So begin with the author's last name. So if we're talking about Judith Jarvis Thompson, you're going to write Thompson, comma, Judith Jarvis, followed by a comma and the rest of the name as presented in the work, and this element with a period. So you have the name, but a period, and then you move on to the title of the source. So Judith Jarvis Thompson's A Defense of Abortion, you're going to go Thompson, comma, Judith Jarvis, period. And then you're going to have A Defense of Abortion in italics. And then once you finish that title typed out, you have another period. You have the title of the container. So Judith Jarvis Thompson's A Defense of Abortion, I believe, was published in a philosophical journal. So the container would be, no wait, hang on. Sorry, I had that backwards. So the title of the source would be the journal that Judith Jarvis Thompson published in, and then the container would be the title of the chapter or her article. So A Defense of Abortion would be title of container. I apologize. Okay, a version, so if it's like, you know, 7th edition or whatever, if she's had multiple editions, you would list that. Not going to be relevant for your summary. If it's a multi-volume book, and I think one of your summaries might be part of like a journal that has multiple editions, you want to list like which volume it is, but other than that, it's not super important. Publisher, if there is a specific publisher, publication date, you'll want to put that in the citations. And so the bottom, if you see the examples, those are what your citations should be looking like. You'll notice that you'll paste it, and then you'll be separating each of the citations with like an enter space, and then you're going to have an hanging an indent if your citation is longer than one line. And I'll show you guys how to do a hanging indent in just a sec. So I didn't go over everything that MLA covers. I went over the things that I think are going to be important for your summer paper only. But if you want to learn more about MLA citation, go to this website. It tells you all about MLA formatting, and if, for future reference, if you need to learn about Chicago style or APA style or anything like that, Purdue OWL is a great place. It's a great resource for you to learn how to do different citation styles. Okay, so now that I've crammed all of that into your brain, let's look at an actual essay and see what it would look like to actually format it to an MLA style. Okay,